Hello. Welcome to In Praise of the Living Dead. I am your host, Dr. Death. It's the second episode in which I will be discussing the Marquis de Sade and his role as an inspiration in the work 30 Immolated, 16 Returned. I will quickly reiterate what we spoke about in the first episode, Introduction. We spoke about the name of the band, 30 Immolated, 16 Returned, which actually comes from the final page of the Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom. It is a tally in which 30 are immolated or sacrificed, 16 are returned or brought back with the Libertines to Paris for more debaucheries. We also spoke a little bit about the Marquis de Sade and the 120 Days of Sodom, especially how it is structured by using passions, turning them into chapters, and there's a progression starting from very simple passions such as carpophilia, urination, and it progresses into utter chaos and murder and torture at the end, creating a structure such as this, and which the album 30 Immolated, 16 Returned is based on. And finally, we also discussed the REIs, or the reflective electronic instruments, which I had built for the work, which were electronic instruments fit to dancers' bodies so that they themselves become instruments throughout the work. This week, I want to take a deeper look into the character, the Marquis de Sade, and how he became an inspiration for the work 30 Immolated, 16 Returned. The Marquis de Sade, infamous philosopher, pornographer, and libertine, set out in his writings to describe and defend his extreme sexual desires and to demonstrate the evil and destructive force in both people and nature and its role in defining our individuality through sexuality. GROTESQUE. In my thesis document, I have noted that it was catharsis that was the main inspiration for me to start looking into the Marquis de Sade, but this isn't quite the truth. And you'll find quite often in writing and in music and composers and authors, we all lie. It's just, you have to get used to these things. And so the real reason was when I went to Mohawk College with my wife, Ruth Gestall, we met a mutual friend, Ryan Kinney, who had spoken to us about the Marquis de Sade and in specific about Justine and just the philosophy and what it was all about. And we were interested, and so we rented the movie Quills, which is a biography on the Marquis de Sade, which turned out to be completely untrue and irrelevant towards his life, but that's okay, it gave us the interest. Fast forward several years later, around 2010, both my wife and I are at the University of Alberta pursuing doctorates in composition theory. And there was a wonderful DVD shop down the road from us called The Lobby, run by Kevin Martin. I believe it's still there. And in this shop was every manner of transgressive film that you could ever find, and we gorged upon it and watched it as often as we possibly could. Now, around the same time, I was introduced by a mutual friend to Matthew P. Unger, who was at the time studying sociology at the University of Alberta, and he had a particular interest in death metal bands. And this mutual friend had told him that I myself was an academic composer and also had a great interest in death metal bands. So of course we got together, and he wanted to just ask me questions on composition and death metal and just my thoughts on these things. We ended up having far too many drinks and spoke through the night and became great friends. And from this, Matthew Unger, myself, and my wife Ruth Gestall, we created a study group for academic readings on transgression. And through our many discussions, we stumbled upon and started to focus on the grotesque. And a few of the authors that became prominent in our readings was Georges Bataille, who spoke in great detail about the Marquis de Sade. GROTESQUE and many others are what is known as the Cal-Tel group. And so we did a lot of these readings, and I got really into the philosophy of the grotesque. And so from this, our study group, we created a panel, and we went back to Paris, where we have many chateaus and many slaves awaiting us, and we gave a presentation on death metal, grotesque, and the use of noise in an idiom to destroy musicality as a means of transgression in music. Now, as I'm doing all these readings on transgression and the grotesque, I'm also starting my thoughts on what my thesis was going to be. And because of these readings, I really wanted the structure to resemble a grotesque. In other words, two opposites that come together in the middle, or two things that are trying to cancel each other out and just end up in this liminal space, this shared space where anything is possible, any chimeric combination is possible. And so part of the reason for this is while I was at the University of Alberta, I was heavily into both the death metal scene and the noise scene, and also on top of it writing academic classical compositions, and I wanted to combine all three of these. And the best way to do that would be through a structure of the grotesque. And so through all these readings I thought, well, they're all talking about the Marquis de Sade. Maybe I should actually read some Marquis de Sade. And so of course I picked up 120 Days of Sodom and started reading it, and right away I could tell that the structure of the actual book is grotesque. What I mean by this is that the initial writing of it, the introduction and the first chapter, are written in normal, regular prose, like such. But as we move along through the structure of the story, just get to it, it's a long story, we start seeing numbered lists. And this is because the Marquis de Sade's tools were being taken away from him as he was locked away in the asylum, and so he had to sneak different ways of writing down his thoughts, and often a lot of the second half of the book is really just his thoughts on how he wanted to do more of the book. It's almost like a reductionism of everything that he was writing, which to me was very interesting and could work very well for a piece of music for me, to start from extreme metal, very not simple but straight ahead extreme metal, drums, guitars, bass, vocals, riffs, and then as the structure moves along it gets destroyed and falls apart into noise-based chaos, kind of like the story of Marquis de Sade breaks away into numbered lists. Okay, and now I'm going to get into a basic biography of the Marquis de Sade, now that you know what inspired me to have him as part of my thesis. So, born Donation Alphonse François in 1740, the Marquis de Sade was a French aristocrat, novelist, judge, and libertine, most famous for his gothic and erotic novels based on extreme sexual violence. He was born in the era of what's known as the Ancient Regime, a political system developed by the Kingdom of France in the mid-16th century. It ruled with complete sinfulness and extreme egoism. Now, in the story 120 Days of Sodom, he actually, the very beginning, actually the first sentence of the introduction, he starts to talk about this type of aristocratic society that he's living in. The extensive wars wherein Louis XIV was burdened during his reign, while draining the state's treasury and exhausting the substance of the people, nonetheless contained the secret that led to the prosperity of a swarm of those bloodsuckers who are always on the watch for public calamities, which, instead of appeasing, they promote or invent so as, precisely, to become able to profit from them the more advantageously. And so people taking advantage of wars and making money from them. Now, when it comes to Sade's biography, it's very limited and we have to grab it from different points, and as Beauvoir said, it's obscure on many points. And so I was able to take from his life from several sources, like Beauvoir's biography analysis, Must We Burn Sade, Pierre Klasowski's The Philosopher Villain, and Yvonne Bloch's The Marquis de Sade, His Life and Works. So what we do know is that Sade's mother left early on, mainly due to the family disgrace. So Sade's father is disgraced. It doesn't say, but the guesses are is that he was found having homosexual encounters and was shamed in bourgeois society after this. They say that the Marquis de Sade had problems with aggressiveness in his youth. There's a point where he was staying actually with the king's son, and then something had happened between the two, and Sade hit the young boy over the head with a toy, and then from them he was sent off to his uncle, Abbé Jacques Francois. He was a man of the cloth at the abbey, and this abbey was a great influence on the Marquis de Sade's writings, because we have things like the decayed state of its dungeon and an extensive library of enlightenment, philosophy, and erotic novels. And then after this, he was taken to the Jesuit school of Louis de Grand in Paris. And after this, a teenager, he enlisted in the 7 Years' War, in which he eventually ascended to the rank of captain. Now, at this point, the Marquis de Sade came from a name that should have been with the aristocracy, but of course his father was shamed out. The family had no money left, and so the Marquis de Sade instantly sought after someone that makes some money off of it, and so he found Renée Pelagie de Montreuil, who was the daughter of a magistrate who was worth a great deal of money. She was loyal to Sade for many years. She aided his escapes from prison, keeping his delinquencies secret, and even helped to foster secret love between Sade and her sister. And it's said in one of his biographies that the greatest threat to Sade's libertine agenda was his mother-in-law, who Beauvoir describes as the abstract and universal justice which inevitably confronts the individual. And as we see, as I'll continue to speak about the Marquis de Sade's life, he really became his own worst enemy. He spent 32 years of his life incarcerated for multiple purposes, including acts of sadism, poisoning, and for basing the erotic novel Zoe and her two acolytes on women of nobility, including Napoleon's wife. And so we will continue these talks about the Marquis de Sade in the next episode. Thank you for tuning in.